Yes, it's on. So, next question.
Okay, from what I understood, how do you handle adversity if some interim delivery the client appears dissatisfied?
It's really funny because Google Translate really sucks. What I meant was like, what are the most important steps you need to take to finish a project as good as possible?
I think definitely having the client's approval throughout the process is key. It's also a bit of a catch-22 because if the client doesn't really know what they want, that quickly can become sort of an endless disaster because they'll keep changing requirements. I think take things to a certain stage and then reviewing, finding that right balance is critical for success because the most difficult clients are clients who really don't know what they want. Because what happens is every meeting it's like, well, no, what we really want is this. And then the next meeting is, well, no, what we really want is that. And it never gets done because every time it's something different, so you go and change everything, which delays things. So contra-wise, the better it's defined at the beginning, from the client's perspective and from yours, a positive outcome. And finding that balance again, it depends on the client. Like clients who really know what they want are much easier to deal with because the requirements don't change. Changing requirements is probably the biggest thing that causes all kinds of problems.
Oké, dus eigenlijk zou je als aannemer jezelf in bescherming moeten nemen, maar ook je klant. Door van tevoren al correct te hebben wat ze nou eigenlijk willen. Ook al zeggen ze dat niet meteen, voordat je eraan begint.
Absolutely. Because it's, when you sense a client who doesn't really know what they want, it's either worth taking the time to nail it down or simply don't deal with them. Because they're the worst type of clients. They really are.
Ja, en je wordt er zelf natuurlijk ook niet beter van.
No, because it creates, what called churn, and effectively you're doing the work over and over and over again, and then it suddenly becomes, why is it taking so long? And and there's, even if you're very particular, I worked with one company and every time something changed, they rewrote the statement of work and said what the impact was and that, but the client didn't like that either, because even though they were right, the end result they're not happy with because things are costing more and taking more time. And because those changes, it kills you and it tends to lead to a lot of unhappiness.
Ja, dus dan kun je beter eigenlijk al het soort van de volwassenen spelen in de situatie en dus zeggen van dit gaat hier niet goed, we kunnen beter nu bespreken wat nou echt de essentie is van wat je verwacht van ons of wat je wil hebben.
Yeah, and we used to, when I worked for one of the companies, we used to have what was called a design freeze. That even if the product manager came and said the requirements have changed and that didn't matter, we would take it to a certain point, and that would be the point where they were allowed to change things. And the reason for that is exactly that, because a lot of times if you change halfway through, then the original stuff didn't get finished, the new stuff is behind, and nothing ever gets done. Whereas at least if you take it to a certain stage, by then they see the results of the initial things, and often the case is like, oh yeah, you know what, that'll actually work. Or yes, now that it's done, we're going to change these two features. Where if it's halfway through, you effectively throw out what you had done, or it never gets seen, and then it just seems that it never ends.
Dus eigenlijk is het wel het meest handige. Maar er moet er nog wel een mogelijkheid zijn om iets te veranderen.
Yes, but that's always the tricky one to manage, because what often happens is what we call feature creep, which, well, can you add this feature? Can you add this feature? And pretty soon you've added 10 new features, and then they're wondering why it's taking so long. And then what's the never-ending project, which is what I just described, where because you stop halfway through and then you get a new set of requirements, then you're halfway through the next set and they change it again, and then
Dus
6 months.
aanpassingen zouden eigenlijk alleen klein mogen zijn en niet veel voorkomend. Gewoon correcte veranderingen.
There either has to be a fundamental change that requires, and everyone has to be on the same page. But again, the client usually won't be happy. Like even if you come back and say, okay, we've evaluated that change and it's going to add a month to the schedule, and that, even though they might understand that it has impact, they're usually not happy about it. And sometimes it's better, the far you are and how big the project is, to say, no, nothing can change until this point.
Dus eigenlijk is het meest slim om bij het originele plan te blijven. En als er dan veranderingen worden aangevraagd, dat je die eerst goed bekijkt voordat je ze toepast.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's usually a sign that things weren't well defined in the first place, unless it was truly change in requirements. But more often than not, it's because the original requirements were not well defined.
Ja, dus je moet eigenlijk gewoon van tevoren al precies weten wat je wil hebben. En zorgen dat hun dat ook weten.
And so if you see a big change coming, you gotta stop and say, okay, is this truly a change, or is this just because they weren't clear on their, requirements in the first place? And if it's that case, you gotta be very careful, because that can cause all kinds of problems.
Okay. Well, do you have like one golden tip for me if I would want to become a project manager?
Yeah, I mean, definitely this managed by objectives, like the clear deliverables, measurable, which is critical, a lot of people forget that, and a timeline. That's the number one. Because if it's not clear, like I said, you have the case of the never-ending project, which you would not believe, especially in big companies, happens all the time. It just never gets out. And then they get behind, and then suddenly they got to catch to the next generation, and then that doesn't get finished.
Never-ending story.
Feature creep is also something to be careful of. They always want more features, but that can delay things enormously. It's better to push that into the next release. So managed by objectives would be the one tip, and the other one is, avoid churn. That whole changing requirements. That just kills so many projects.
Okay.
We need this, we need that, we need this, we need more features. Requirements have changed, because that projects that never see the light of day because of that.
Okay, well, I'll take that in consideration. Well, I know you've also been like the one giving the project. So how do you hoe stel je dat op?
Yeah, so for example, I've done several projects on Elance, which of course you can see what the contractors have done, which helps. I mean, something like Elance and Odesk are phenomenal, because as a client, you can see how many projects the contractors have done, how happy their clients are, their portfolios, so it's very good to get an idea of the work done. Again, the biggest thing with giving these contracts, especially when you can't meet the contractors in person, is it has to be spelled out so crystal clear.
Ja, maar als je dan zelf zo'n opdracht maakt, hoe zorg je er dan voor dat het echt helder is? Laat je het dan iemand anders lezen, of?
So a couple things, like because of this, it does force you to really think about what you want. Depending on the project, for example, if you're building an application, sometimes showing what all the screens should look like, by going through that process, it's very clear on what you want to deliver. You've gone through it yourself. Having someone else review it, obviously the contractor write to you exactly how they understood it. Those are all, very essential things. So again, it all does come back to that communications of making sure that you might think it's straightforward, but by having them tell you what they interpret it as will often reveal what's not clear.
Dus je moet eigenlijk denken wat jij wil dat het eindproduct, zeg maar, hoe dat eruit ziet. Tegelijkertijd bedenken wat je als aannemer had willen zien van jou als opdrachtgever. En tegelijkertijd het ook nog laten reviewen door iemand anders. Die kan er dingen uithalen die jij zelf niet zou zien.
Yes, it should be clear enough in a way that either someone who has field expertise